Come along with me on a journey through 178 years of extraordinary history of our beloved Relief Society. The Relief Society was formally organized in 1842, but it had its beginnings in the 1830s in the Kirkland, Ohio, during the construction of the Kirkland Temple. One day, Brother Joseph entered the temple and saw the women working together sewing the temple veils. "Well, sisters," he said, "you are always on hand. Mary was the first at the resurrection, and the sisters now are the first to work on the inside of the temple." When the saints moved to Nauvoo a few years later, women again joined together to help with the building of the Nauvoo temple. Sarah Kimball invited several neighbors to join her in her parlor on March 4th, 1842, to sew shirts for the temple workmen. As they worked, they discussed the idea of a ladies' society. Their enthusiasm grew as the hours went by, and before the day was over, Eliza R. Snow was commissioned to write a constitution and bylaws to present to the prophet Joseph Smith. A few days later, Joseph told Eliza that the Constitution was the best he had ever read, but that the Lord had something better for them than the written Constitution. He said, "Invite them all to meet me and a few of the brethren in the hall above the store next Thursday afternoon, and I will organize the sisters under the priesthood after a pattern of the priesthood." Addressing on Thursday, March 17th, 1842, 20 sisters and 2 of the 12, John Taylor and Willard Richards, were present. Addressing the group, Joseph put into words the object of the society, that the society of sisters might provoke the brethren to good works in looking to the wants of the poor, searching after objects of charity, and in administrating to the wants, to assist by correcting the morals and strengthening the virtues of the community. At a later meeting, he told them they were not only to relieve the poor, but to save the souls. And that first meeting, the women chose Emma Smith as their president, and she then chose 2 counselors. John Taylor ordained Emma and gave her a blessing, in which he blessed her that she might be the mother of Israel and look to the wants and the needy and be a pattern of the virtue, and possesses all the qualifications necessary for her to stand and preside and dignify her office, to teach the females those principles requisite for the future usefulness. Elder Taylor then suggested that the new organization be named the Nauvoo Female Benevolent Society. Emma objected to the word benevolent because other corrupt organizations of the day included that word. She said, "We are going to do something extraordinary. When a boat is stuck in the rapids and a multitude of Mormons on board, we shall consider that the loud call for relief. We expect extraordinary occasions and pressing calls." Well, her remarks were pervasive, and the name chosen was the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo.
This was a never-to-be-forgotten time for the sisters of the Church of Jesus Christ. My husband, the prophet Joseph, told us that the church was never fully organized till the sisters were thus organized. At that first meeting, Joseph donated a $5 gold piece, and additional contributions brought the total donations to $10.62. We elected Sister Eliza Snow to be our secretary, and in addition to those at the meeting, we welcomed into membership 7 that were not there. I then discussed the duties of the members to seek out and relieve the distressed, that each member should be ambitious to do good. We were to meet each week to discuss and accomplish our duties. In our second meeting, we welcomed in 44 new members, including Hiram's wife, Mary Fielding Smith, and our dear mother, Lucy Mack Smith. Mother Smith addressed our group saying, "This institution is a good one. We must cherish one another, watch over one another, comfort one another, and gain instruction, that we may all sit down in heaven together." We met together thereafter each week, and each week our numbers grew. Each sister who became a member was voted in and agreed to actively participate. Joseph attended several of our meetings. On April 28th, he told the sisters, "You are now placed in a situation in which you can act according to those sympathies which God has planted in your bosoms. If you live up to your privileges, the angels cannot be restrained from being your associates. I now turn the key in your behalf in the name of the Lord, and this society shall rejoice and knowledge and intelligence shall flow down from this time forth. By summer, our membership was so large that no building in Nauvoo could accommodate the women, so we held our meetings outdoors in the grove near the temple site. The sisters had so much to do in assisting the poor, welcoming the newly arrived saints, and caring for the sick. With membership well over 1,100 and lack of indoor facilities during the winter, we did not meet from September of 1842 to June of 1843, but our sisters continued to help one another. When our Relief Society meetings reconvened on June 16, 1843, we admonished our sisters, in addition to helping the poor, to cast in our mites to assist the brethren in building the Lord's house. Our treasurer, Sister Coles, reported the financial status of the society. $500 had been received, and $400 had been spent doing much good and making the hearts of many rejoice. We formed the Necessity Committee, a forerunner of visiting teaching, in 1843 to search for those who were poor and suffering. During our second year, we held 14 Relief Society meetings and again adjourned for the winter months. We reconvened again in March of 1844, counting 1,341 as members of Relief Society. This was our last formal meeting, however, because over the next few months, persecution of my husband and the other saints escalated, culminating with the death of my husband, Joseph Smith, and his brother, Hiram Smith.
Thus, nearly 2 years to the day after its organization, the Relief Society ceased. Emma led the way in compassionate service during her short tenure, not only by virtue of her calling, but also by her compassionate nature. Emmeline B. Wells recalled that Sister Emma was benevolent and hospitable. She was beloved by the people, of whom many were indebted to her favors and kindnesses. Emma was called to go through many trials herself, not the least of which were the deaths of 7 of her 11 children and the martyrdom of her beloved husband. And though she chose not to go west with the saints, she was no longer affiliated with the restored church. She continued throughout her life to act in the spirit of her office, which, as she told the sisters in 1842, was to seek out and relieve distress, to be ambitious, and to do good. The Relief Society remained disbanded for more than 2 decades when it would be reorganized in a new place and under a new prophet. But though not formally organized, the sisters had many informal meetings and gave much compassionate service during those years as they crossed the plains and settled in the Rocky Mountains. Some wards in the valley did organize their own formal relief societies. The nucleus of the Relief Society was still intact, the flame still burned brightly. Finally, in 1866, President Brigham Young called upon all the wards to organize the Relief Society. In each ward, Elijah R. Snow, who had kept the spirit of the Relief Society burning all over those years, was given a mission to assist them in organizing and to take with her sister Zena D. Young. We recommend these females' Relief Society to be organized immediately, Brigham Young said. We have many talented women among us, and we wish their help in this matter. You will find that the sisters will be mainspring of the movement. Let a sister appeal for the relief of the suffering and the poverty, and she is amongst sure to be successful.
I felt that my first important assignment was to rekindle the spirit of Relief Society, which I had loved and nurtured for 23 years, and to reestablish its place in the church. I felt very important to follow the pattern set in Nauvoo by the prophet Joseph Smith. I was the secretary then, and I carried the minutes of Relief Society meetings held in Nauvoo West with me, knowing that someday our wonderful society would be organized again. As Sister Zena Young and I visited various wards, I told the saints about the original Relief Society and bore my testimony of Joseph as a prophet of God. The name we used in the valley was the Female Relief Society. While I was the Relief Society president, I also helped organize and direct the Young Ladies Retrenchment Association, 1869, and the primary in 1878. We were very busy with meetings as we organized these auxiliaries in all the wards. We began a magazine in 1872 called the Women's Exponent, in which women could find literary fulfillment and which later became a great voice for women's suffrage. President Young asked me to collect handmade items from the Sisters of the Church to display in Philadelphia at an exposition celebrating the U.S. Centennial in 1876. Because of the tremendous response, I realized that women could sell their handmade items to help with financial needs of their families, and we started the Women's Commission Store, which prospered. During my tenure, there was a great need for women to serve as nurses, midwives, and even doctors. Under the Relief Society, we organized classes in home nursing and midwifery and many young women, including Ellis Ship Reynolds and Romania Penrose Pratt, were encouraged to go east to study medicine. As these women returned to practice medicine in the Salt Lake Valley, President Young charged the Relief Society with establishing maternity hospital, so I became the president of the Deseret Hospital, which served women for about 10 years.
Eliza R. Snow devoted much of her life to the women of the church, nurturing the sisters for more than 4 decades and serving for 21 years as the general president of the Relief Society. Through all these experiences, her spirit remained strong and vibrant. She died at the Lion House on December 5, 1887, just a month before she would have been 84. Zena Young was called to be the 3rd general president of the Relief Society. Zena and her family members were baptized in 1835, she by Hiram Smith at the age of 14. Zena knew the truth of the Book of Mormon by just gazing upon the book, so close was she to the Spirit of God. She was a sealed wife of both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, even though at the time of her sealing to Joseph Smith, she was the wife of Henry Bailey Jacobs, also a member. Henry left her in winter quarters to go on a mission to England and after went to reside in California, never living with her again. Zena came with the Young family the rest of the way to the valley. She became known as Aunt Zena in the Young family, and after taking obstetrics course at the request of Brigham, she delivered all of the Young babies as well as others. Zena was instrumental in establishing the Deseret Hospital. She also started a nursing school and for the first time headed a school of obstetrics. When Brigham Young began to promote the silk industry as a cottage industry in the 1870s, he charged Zena with the responsibility. Even though she found the silkworms abhorrent, having many nightmares of feeding them, she silently and saltwaterly endured and fed millions of them herself and watched the silk industry enjoy a quarter-century of its success in Utah.
As a young girl, my mother prepared me for my role in Relief Society before it even existed. In Kirtland, it was her custom to take me in her buggy with her as she hunted out the distressed and needy. I was voted a member of Relief Society at the second meeting held in Nauvoo at the age of 21. And when Brigham Young reorganized the Relief Society, I was chosen treasurer. I accompanied Eliza throughout the territory as we organized the Relief Society. We were known as the heart and the head, I the heart and she the head of Relief Society. Together we traveled thousands of miles by wagon and carriage to Relief Societies throughout the territory. Frequently on such trips, we 2 elderly ladies would have to make an unscheduled stop to repair a wagon wheel or fix a broken buggy tongue. When we were unable to make enough mileage between settlements before nightfall, we camped out under the stars. I was 67 years old when Sister Eliza died in 1888, and President Young called me to be the 3rd president of Relief Society. When I was set apart by President Woodruff, he blessed me that I would continue to have my heart drawn out towards the sisters and would do much good and relieve the suffering of those who were sick and afflicted. I continue visiting Relief Societies in the widely spread out Mormon settlements in the West, encouraging local units to establish nursing classes and to improve medical care. Before Utah gained statehood in 1896, I campaigned for the restoration of women's voting rights that had been rescinded by the Edmunds-Tucker Act of 1887. During my administration, the Relief Society became a charter member of the National Council of Women, in which all of my successors have kept membership. I was one of the vice presidents and attended a number of its conferences. The Relief Society became incorporated in 1892 because of our assets and because of our involvement in the National Council of Women. The official name became the National Women's Relief Society. The church became too large for we general leaders to continue visiting local units, so we invited representatives from each stake to attend the first Relief Society General Conference in the Assembly Hall on Temple Square. On April 6, 1889, this conference to be held semi-annually, then annually until 1970.
Zena died in 1901, having served 13 years. At her funeral, Sister Emmeline B. Willis said, "No woman was ever greater loved than she. She was Aunt Zena to all Israel." Fittingly inscribed on her grave is the Relief Society motto, "Charity never faileth." Sister Bathsheba Smith was called to replace Sister Young. Bathsheba was converted at age 16 by George A. Smith, a cousin of the prophet and one of the early missionaries and apostles of the church whom she later married. Her family were Southern aristocrats, and she was ever a gracious woman. She was the youngest woman at age 18 to be present at the meeting founding Relief Society.
I was called to serve after the death of our beloveds and serve until 1910. I felt it important to continue on with the nursing classes that she had established, and being very interested in home industry and the importance of teaching and training children. In 1902, we introduced the first organized lesson to be given throughout the entire church, which we called Mother's Lesson. The lessons included instruction in marriage, parental care, child rearing, industry, obedience, honesty, and reverence. One of the important subjects affecting women of my time was suffrage. We supported the efforts of the National Women's Suffrage Association. I showed my support of this by talks to our Relief Society members and in articles in the Women's Exponent. Longing to have our own offices for not only Relief Society, but the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Society and the primary. In 1896, we obtained permission by the Brethren to raise money for and build our very own building. They donated a plot of land to us close to the Temple Block. You see, the Relief Society was completely self-supporting in our day, but only for our own needs, but the needs of the poor as well. We raised our own funds for whatever we did. The fundraising for our building moved forward during the presidency, and we raised about $1,000. But in 1908, plans were changed, and the Brethren asked us to share a building with the president, bishopric, and others, and donate our money to that project, which we did despite our disappointment. This is the old church office building on South Temple.
Bathsheba, the last of the original 20 members of the Relief Society, passed away at age 88 in 1910. Sister Emma Lane B. Willis, in her 82nd year, was called to replace her as the 5th president. She was a dainty woman who stood barely 5 feet tall. She summed up the theme of her own life when she said, "I believe in women." The sisterhood of women and their causes filled her 93 years. She married James Harvey Harris when they both were just 15. They had a child who died when she was 16. James went to find work elsewhere and never returned. She became a plural wife of Newell K. Whitney, and when he died, she proposed to Daniel H. Wells, who became her as plural wife.
I had served in some capacity in the General Relief Society from 1866, so I was much familiar with the workings. I became the editor of the Women's Exponent in 1877 at its inception and remained deeply involved in it for the next 37 years. It became a powerful voice for the suffrage movement. I gained prominence in the women's suffrage movement as I represented the Relief Society, becoming dear friends with Susan B. Anthony in particular. In 1876, Brigham Young asked me to direct a project for women of the Relief Society to store wheat. It seemed a strange request for women, but my Relief Society sisters all around the territory got busy and gathered wheat. We gleaned from the fields, sold our Sunday eggs, crocheted, and sewed items to buy wheat. We gathered granaries full. As soon as enough money was donated, we built our own granaries. We stored 10,000 465 bushels the first season, with hope of 50,000 bushels the next season. We donated the wheat to the poor and loaned or sold several thousand bushels to farmers for spring planting. The wheat project continued to grow over the years and become one of the most successful long-term Relief Society projects. As a result, Utah Grain eased the effects of a drought that ravaged southern Utah in 1899, helped the survivors of the San Francisco earthquake in 1906, and fed thousands during World War I, when the Relief Society sold 100,000 bushels to the United States government for $412,000. Again, in 1940, we used these funds to buy and store wheat. The program continued under the Relief Society until 1978, when President Barbara Smith officially turned over to the first presidency the Relief Society wheat program, representing 225,291 bushels of wheat, with a net worth of $1,651,157, and also wheat fund assets of over $750,000, thus ending 106 years of Relief Society wheat stewardship. Please notice the wheat in the Relief Society symbol. I was called in 1910 to be the president of the Relief Society. In my administration, the Relief Society adopted the motto, "Charity Never Faileth." Through our money-raising efforts to support our charitable work, we owned real estate, greeneries, dressmaking shops, cattle, and sheep herds. And from those ventures, thousands of dollars were dispensed to the poor and orphaned. To meet the demands, we organized the Relief Society's Social Services Department in 1919. We established study courses for Relief Society in theology, genealogy, art, literature, home science, obstetrics, and nursing. We encouraged each ward to shape its own programs based on these courses. I published the last issue of the Women's Expedient in February 1914, and we replaced it with the Relief Society magazine, which among other things contained the Relief Society lessons and the monthly visiting teaching message, when that became a part of visiting teaching. I was very surprised when President Grant came to my home on April 2nd, 1921, when I was 91, and released me, as I had supposed I would have served to my death as others had.
Emma Lyon became ill and passed away just 3 weeks after her release. The next 3 general presidents served during trying times, with a lot of their attention spent in social services and welfare work. Clarissa Williams expanded the Social Services Department, with Relief Society leaders receiving specialized training. Her successor, Louise Robinson, a shy, self-expressing woman, and unlike her predecessors, was a woman without education or money. She was just the person to serve during the Depression days because she understood the needs and situation of the common person. Amy Brown Lyman served during World War II and was particularly cognizant of the saints in Europe, having served with her husband as the mission president there just before the war. Of course, a lot of her work dealt with effects of the war. Each of these presidents continued with an active role in participation in the National Council of Women. They were all wonderful women. Let's hear briefly from each.
I began my Relief Society work when I was 16 years old, going around the block as an assistant block teacher, later to be a visiting teacher. It formed the foundation for much of the work that I've been able to do since. As the Relief Society president, I was concerned about infant and maternal mortality rates and the high number of child and adolescent deaths, the lack of opportunities for the handicapped, and the low standard of living for many women. At the close of World War I, the U.S. government forbade any group or individual to store large quantities of food. We therefore sold our wheat from the storage program to the United States government. Relief societies throughout the church found themselves with large amounts of cash, since that was where the wheat was, in individual wards. We recommended that these funds be centralized in the presiding bishop's office and that the interest therefrom be used for health, maternity, and child welfare services. We also funded camps for underprivileged children, health examinations for preschool children, a free milk fund, and courses in home hygiene and care of the sick.
I was good friends with Clarissa through the Red Cross during World War I. when Clarissa was called to be the General Relief Society president, I was present when she was sustained. I listened while her counselors were announced, Jenny Knight as first counselor and Louise Robinson as second counselor. I raised my hand in approval, such surprise that the second counselor had a name so similar to mine. I never heard of her, but I voted for her. When I realized it was myself, I was so upset. I did not have the ability or the background to fulfill this calling, and I worried for days. But the words of my good friend Anna Musser gave me comfort and courage. True, many people have money, but it is poor and humble people that make up the church. I established Mormon Handicraft in 1937 as a way for a woman to make money selling their handwork. The shop was a huge success and continued to be operated by the Relief Society until 1986, when it was turned over to the Desert Book for operation. I established the Singing Mothers choruses, which were a part of every ward Relief Society for many years. During my administration, we adopted the colors blue and gold as the official colors of Relief Society.
While in Chicago with my husband, I did work at the famous social settlement Hull House, where I became lifelong friends with its founder, Jane Addams. This experience made me resolve to spend my life helping others. I personally knew every General Relief Society president from Eliza R. Snow to Belle Spafford. I was one of the editors of Relief Society magazine. We introduced the official seal of the Relief Society as it is to the present, with its colors blue and gold, and the name Relief Society was changed for the final time to the Relief Society of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We did everything we could to relieve the suffering brought on by the war. We sewed clothing, knitted, and assembled first aid kits for the Red Cross, among other things.
Amy's successor was Belle Stafford, who served from 1945 through 1974. Belle was an educated woman, teaching special education classes at BYU early in her marriage. She had a warmth and affection for people that served well throughout her life in her callings and social educations.
I wasn't always converted to Relief Society. As a young married woman, I was always involved in the young women programs of the church, never attending Relief Society until at age 30, my visiting teacher in a new ward invited me to go. To be nice, I agreed to go. I attended the meetings regularly for a time, but was shocked when the bishop asked me to be a counselor in Relief Society. I responded by telling the bishop that Relief Society was for women my mother's age, and I had no experience in Relief Society, and furthermore had no desire to learn. I did accept the call, but grudgingly, and tried several times to get the bishop to release me. Each time he just said, just try it a little longer. The third time, I decided if I were going to stay in the calling, I would quit complaining and give it my best. And I did enjoy it as I filled the other Relief Society callings in the stake. I was called to the General Board in 1935 when President Louise Robinson gave me the assignment work for which I was not qualified, homemaking. I also served as the editor of the Relief Society magazine for 8 years. When President Clark asked me to be the president, I asked him if the rumor I had heard was true that auxiliary presidencies would only serve 5 years. He looked at me over the rim of his eyeglasses and said, "You may not last that long, sister." I proved him wrong as I served for 29 years. Perhaps my most significant accomplishment was the construction of the Relief Society building. Having been disappointed in our desires to have our own building in previous time, we were thrilled when the first presidency gave us a plot of ground across from the temple and authorized us to raise funds to build a building. Many wards had their own Relief Society buildings. There were 100,000 dues-paying members of Relief Society at that time, and we asked each member to contribute $5. With sacrifice and effort, we reached our goal of 500,000 and began construction in 1953 and dedicated our wonderful building in 1956. I became a very influential member of the National Council of Women and also in the International Council. When I first attended a national dinner meeting, I had trouble getting a seat at a table because I was a Mormon. I finally approached the council president and asked her where I could sit since all the chairs seemed filled, and she graciously asked me to sit next to her at the head table. I was skeptical of the value of the Relief Society being a member of this council and approached President George A. Smith about withdrawing from it, as I could see little value to the Relief Society and it was costing a lot to travel to these meetings. It surprised me when he says, "Do you always think in terms of what you get? Don't you think you should think in terms of what Mormon women can give to the world? I suggest you take 2 or 3 of your board members and attend all the meetings and continue your membership." Through the years, I came to feel that the Relief Society made a valuable contribution to these organizations and our opinions and values shared. In 1968, I was nominated to be the president. At first, I turned it down, but in counseling with President McKay, he urged me to accept, which I did. Mine was a presidency of change, as you can imagine, spanning nearly 30 years. With the welfare department of the church becoming firmly established, the direct welfare work of the Relief Society naturally began to diminish. In 1970, the Relief Society magazine was discontinued and the Ensign, New Era, and Friend were established in its place. The discontinuance of our beloved Relief Society magazine was difficult, but we supported the brethren in the decision to consolidate the church magazines. Another change for us was our loss of financial independence when the priesthood correlation program was established in the 1970s. The Relief Society had always supported itself and all its programs, even built our own building. But with the welfare department firmly in place, it was agreed that this change would give Relief Society members more time for compassionate service and teaching the gospel if we were no longer concerned about generating and managing our own funds. This was very new for us, but again, we supported the brethren. The hardest part of this change was giving up our bazaars, beloved by the whole church. Another change that went along with this in 1971 was that sisters would no longer pay dues, which were at that time $1 a year. From that time on, all women in the church 18 years and older would automatically be enrolled without dues as members of Relief Society, and it would become the official women's organization of the church. This really made our ranks swell and was a very welcome and looked for change when it happened.
When Belle was released, she wrote in her journal, 29 and a half years have passed since the day during which I have served under 6 of the prophets presidents of the church, Heber J. Grant, George J. Smith, David O. McKay, Joseph Fielding Smith, Harold B. Lee, Spencer W. Kimball, and the great and inspired counselors. What a rare, marvelous blessing. Well, this pretty much brings us up to Relief Society as we know it today, except for a few significant changes in the last 30 years that I will mention. Since Sister Spafford, we have had 8 wonderful leaders that have served. Barbara Smith, whose presidency was embroiled in the time of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment and who was an influential voice against its ratification and event defeat. Barbara Winder, Elaine Jack, Mary Ellen Smoot, Bonnie Parkin, Julie B. Beck, Linda K. Burton, and our current president, Jean B. Bingham. Work meetings became homemaking meetings in 1966 when Relief Society no longer needed to put emphasis on raising money and welfare needs. And then in 1971, the Relief Society came under the budget of the church and no longer needed fundraisers. Many classes were born, and activities were held to help the Sisters Relief Society be better wives, mothers, and homemakers and spiritual leaders in their homes. These activities developed over the years from basic help classes for sisters to wonderful crafting opportunities to fulfill our creative needs. The purpose of Relief Society was to bring sisters and their families to Christ. In about 1999, Sherry Dew declared, "The day of the doodad is dead. The things we do in Relief Society need to fill our lamps, not just polish them." With the Make-Up Relief Society sisters being so diverse, homemaking meetings became home, family, and personal enrichment meeting. And in 2006, another change. Enrichment meeting were no longer to be held monthly, but quarterly. A dramatic change occurred in Relief Society when the church went to the 3-hour block schedule in 1980, and Relief Society was no longer held during the week. usually on Tuesday, except for the homemaking meeting once a month. Other changes include the announcement of the Proclamation of the Family, introduced at the Relief Society broadcast in 1995, and the publication of the Relief Society declaring in 2000, and in renewed emphasis on service during this time. In 2011, the book Daughters in My Kingdom, The History of the Work of the Relief Society was published, providing a historical view of the grand scope of the work of the Relief Society. A simplified Relief Society logo was also approved at this time to benefit worldwide church. In 2018, it was announced that the 3-hour block would be shortened to 2-hour block, allowing for a more home-centered approach. Relief Society classes now meet twice a month. The shift from visiting and home teaching to ministering was also announced. Membership has grown over 7 million women in nearly 200 countries worldwide. But regardless of time or place, Relief Society still means lifting one another spiritually, loving and taking care of one another, and absorbing insight and inspiration from other women headed in the right direction. When Emma Smith stated with no small amount of vision, "We are going to do something extraordinary," she was certainly prophetic. What has transpired through the past 178 years has been nothing short of extraordinary. Women have responded magnificently to a multitude of pressing calls. Relief Society spans the globe and represents women who come in every age, shape, and color. Throughout the world, the other women's organizations have come and gone. But if anything, the relevance of Relief Society in the lives of women and its importance to the church are greater today than ever. And yet, as we articulate by Mother Smith, our basic goal as Relief Society sisters has remained the same. It is to cherish one another, watch over one another, comfort one another, and gain instruction, that we may all sit down in heaven together.